So part 2, how to make door cards. Custom ones. In part 1 I made the patterns, or I made a pattern. The pattern was for the front door. I've also done this pattern as well. This pattern goes next to the door. It's for the back of the car. Most of the time when you make a door card, there will be another one that is next to it, whether it's a rear door or just a side panel. But it's very rare that you just have one door card with nothing next to it. Obviously, I've got 2 patterns now. This particular door card is going to have a fluted panel on the door card, and the fluted panel is going to be the same on the rear card. Now that flute has to line up, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut both cards out, I'm going to offer them both up to the vehicle, and then I'm going to put a line across. Now that is my line that I'm going to mark everything from, so that line will run from one to the other, and if everything's measured from the line on both cards, then all the flutes and anything else should line up. My first job is to cut them out. Now I'm going to cut them out of 3.6mm ply. I always cut door cards out of plywood. Some people use hardboard. Now hardboard, when it gets wet, will distort, whereas plywood, WBP plywood, water and boil proof, doesn't distort when it gets wet. It stays the same shape, doesn't start to wobble. Potentially it'll get mouldy, but that's all it will do. It will only get mouldy, it won't distort. So that's why I use WBP ply, and it's a little bit more stable. Very good for stapling too. You can glue to it quite well, and it's not too thick, only being 3.6mm, 1/8 of an inch, something like that. Now when I come to cut the door cards out, I want to put everything on the card that is on the pattern. Any fixing holes go on there, the holes for the window winders, and things like that. I'm not going to put anything else on. That will get put on later when I come to make the cover. The cover on this is going to be leather. Once I've cut the cards out, I will design on the card. So first job is to get the plywood out. So if you remember in part 1, I said that the door card would be slightly curved. It curves both ways. There's a high spot in the middle of the door, and obviously the card has got to then bend around that in both directions, and this will bend that way, and it will bend the other way. Now it's always best to use a straight edge of the board if you've got a straight edge on the card. Now if you remember in part 1 that this edge here was a straight line, so I'm going to use that straight line up against the edge of the card. Now the pattern is exact, it fits the door card perfectly, but I'm going to have a cover on this, and the cover is leather. Leather's about 1 mil thick, so when I come to cut out the card, I want to deduct that millimetre all around. So when I mount the line on and cut it out, I'm going to cut inside the line to get rid of that millimetre. The blade's only about 1 mil thick that I'm using. Now something else that you need to think about when cutting out things like this is the kind of fixings that you're going to use. Now on this card, the fixing holes are very close to the edge of the pattern. These are the kind of fixings that I'm going to use. They're offset. It's offset, and it's offset by about 10mm. So the hole that I drill in the board isn't in the same spot as the hole that's in the door. You need to bring them in. I'll show you when I get around to doing it. It's a little bit hard to explain sometimes. So I'm going to pin the pattern to the board. I'm going to use this straight edge here, and remember I need to remove 1 millimetre, so I'm going to overhang the pattern a tiny touch. I need to get this as flat as possible. Now it's very important that I get this as stable as possible. I'm happy with how that's there now. So just gonna draw around the pattern. Marking that, marking that. I'm going to cut these bigger than I'm going to draw them on, because I've got all this area here to work with. Same here. So I can have the hole relatively big. I'm going to dash this in and then join the dots later. The reason I do that is, if I tried to draw this in as one straight line, there's a good chance that I would end up with a wavy line, and then I wouldn't know which part of the line is correct. Dashing it in means I can hold that there, I can put a dash in, hold that there, put a dash in, hold that there, put a dash in, and I'm not coming in and out then. I've just got a correct line, if you know what I mean. Same with the inside, dash it in. Now I need to mark all the fixing holes. So all these are fixing holes. So I'm going to put them in, and then when I come to drill them, I'll need to drill them somewhere around about here. Drilling a hole here, a 10mm hole, it becomes very close to the edge and you end up with a weak point here. So having the hole here means you've got a little bit more strength on the edge of the card. Now that that is drawn out, I'm going to cut it out. I'm going to use this blade. It's a very fine tooth, thin blade, perfect for thin wood. Now when it comes to cutting out this part here at the top, I'm going to leave that a little bit long, and then I'm going to offer it up to the door. Because I'm a little bit unsure about how stable the pattern was around here, because it was such a thin pattern, it's better off leaving it longer here, cutting the rest out, offering up to the car. I'm not going to cut the inside out because I'm going to offer that up to the car as well, and just double check everything before I commit to cutting this line here. We haven't got a lot to work with, so always best to double check things before I cut them out. I can't add any more to this, so I'm going to commit to this line here. Just going to come inside the line, and when I get to the top here, I'm just going to come straight up. I'll trim the rest off later. I'm going to use a Forstner bit to cut the hole. Always use Forstner bits on this kind of thing. So I can now offer this up to the car. So I'll be back in a minute. Now it's a good job that I did check. It is a little bit off on the top. Everything else is fine. The holes, the 2 holes that I drilled in could have been a little bit bigger, but I'm going to enlarge them with a cone drill, a step drill. Like I said, we've got plenty of play in those. This is what sometimes happens when you pattern things. You're obviously patterning with a bit of plastic, not with a bit of board that you're actually using, and they act a little bit differently. If it was completely flat, no curve in the door, they would be the same. But because we've got curve in the door and we're curving both ways, the wood acts different than the patterning plastic does. So just checking, making sure everything is correct before you do any final trimming, it's fine. I'll show you how much difference there is in what was patterned and what the actual board says. It's, I won't say a lot, but it's enough to make a difference. So the blue line is what the car says it is. So you can see the difference between that and that. I'm not going to cut the inside out yet. I'll leave that till the very end. The longer I can keep this board stable, the better. So while I'm working on it, drilling any holes, things like that, I will leave all this in place and then I'll cut it off at the last minute. Now obviously we have 2 doors, so I'm going to use this on the opposite door and make sure they're the same. Now there's no guarantees that they are the same. It's quite an old vehicle. This car's in 1939 and a lot of old vehicles were more hand built than they are today, and things sometimes are a little bit off. Both the door card and the panel, the rear panel that goes next to it, they've both been checked and I'm happy with both of them actually. So I'm going to use the ones that I've cut out as a template. Just makes life a little bit easier, but when I do this I must remember that the line I'm going to draw on is going to be bigger than this card, so I need to cut inside that line all around, and that should give me the correct size. Once that's done, I'll put all the holes in, fix it to the vehicle, make sure all the fixings line up, everything's fine. Once I've got the fixings on the cards and they're fixed into position, I can then put a datum line through the whole card, and that's where I'm going to measure everything from. So to make sure this doesn't move, I'm going to clamp it down so it's down on the bench and down on the board underneath, and then just draw around it. So they're pretty close. What I am going to do, I'm going to clamp them both together and just sand around both of them at the same time, just get them to be exactly the same. I'm now ready to drill the holes, and to make life easier, what I'm going to do, I've got a piece of wood here, just a piece of plywood, and it's the correct thickness to have a spacer, so I'll put that up against the hole so the edge of the plywood here is in the centre of the hole here, and I'll just put a mark. I will use spike, anything pointed, and just put a hole in. Go all the way along the card, do the same. Now there is a bit of play in the fixings that I'm using. They will slide it in, slide out and rotate. So this hole isn't actually super critical. There is movement, but what is critical is that you know which way these are supposed to face. So what I do is I make sure they radiate outwards from the center, so like a clock almost. Now at the top I'm not going to be able to do that because I don't have enough thickness of wood, any width around the window surround. So I'm going to use a 10mm Forstner bit. Right, so I'm going to try this one on. I'm not going to put the clips in all the holes. I just need maybe 3 or 4 just to get the card in position so it doesn't move. So I'll do one over there, one here, and maybe one around the top somewhere, and then try that on, get the other card offered up to it in the vehicle, and then put my datum line in. So I will put one in this top corner, just there. Put one just here. Put one here, and put one here. I've now got the 2 boards in the vehicle. Obviously I now need to get inside and put the lines on. I'm going to put 2 lines on across both boards obviously, and then I can remove the boards, take the bench, and I can start to make the cover. Right, there's something else that I need to do before I can make the cover. If you remember in part 1 I said about the handle, the pull handle that's going onto the door card, and it needed a bracket behind it that locates into a kind of recess in the door itself. I need to make those brackets up because they need to be attached to the door card before I cover the door card, because whatever fixing I'm going to use have to go through the board and the bracket and be secure enough to not pull away. So whether it's a small bolt with a big washer on, whether it's a flange rivet is probably going to work. If you don't know what a flange rivet is, it's a rivet with a bigger flange. So I'm going to make up the bracket now. I'm going to measure obviously how big it's got to be and how much bend it has in it. It's like a dog leg kind of bracket. I'm going to make one of those up, test it on one of the door cards, probably the door card that I keep testing, keep using that as my reference door card. So I've just made up the 2 brackets. These were just a corner bracket, and I've just bent it out, trimmed this end off here, and I'm just going to attach it to the card via a couple of screws for now. So I think it's supposed to go around about there. I've got 2 marks here where the top of the recess in the metal is, so I want this to be a little bit above it, and I'm just going to put 2 screws in there and see if it's okay. Right, see if this works. That is spot on. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to rivet this in place now. I'll try this on again. So that was absolutely fine. I'm going to now have a quick tidy up. Don't want any sawdust around while I'm doing the next part, which will be making the cover. Now I need to get the pattern out for that, because I'm going to draw on the pattern and on the board just to make sure everything is alright. It's having a pocket in the bottom and it's having flutes down the middle, but the front part on the door card, the flutes are going to curve. It's not going to be straight all the way through the card. It's going to have a curve on the end of it, which makes life a little bit harder. But the rear card will just be straight. So you'll see both ways of doing things, having curves, having straights, and you'll see why curves are much harder. If at this point now this was just a plain card, I'd just cover them. Whether it's vinyl, fabric, I'd put scrim foam onto the board. Now on something like this I can go slightly thicker than I would do normally. I could go 6mm scrim foam. But what I'll probably do with this is I'll probably have where the flutes are, that will be 6mm, and the rest of the board will be 3mm scrim foam. And I need to back the actual leather when it comes to the flutes, because I'm going to stitch through the leather to create the flute design. The rest I will glue to the board and not to the leather. You'll see why I do that when I get round to it. So I've got the two cards now on the bench. I'm going to line them up via these two marks here. And so the patterns are now pinned to the boards are in the correct position relative to each other. Now what I need to do, I need to mark out the design, or at least part of the design, onto both pieces of pattern. The owner has sent me an image of the design he wants. I'll put the image up on screen. It's not the best quality image in the world, bit of an Instagram screenshot and quite low quality. It gives me a kind of a reference of what I'm doing. So the first thing I need to do is decide where the top of the flute is going to come. Now it's going to come below the handle. I never put a seam through any door furniture, always stay away from those areas. Just looks nicer and less chance of the seam coming apart, especially if you put it through something that has got a hole in it. That's roughly where I want to be, the top piece. So we've got a plain piece at the top on both cards, then the flute, and then plain underneath. Now if you've seen from the image, the flute at the front goes round in a curve and on the back, but the owner doesn't want that on the back. He wants just a continuation of the flutes. It makes life easier on this card, but obviously harder on this card because of the curve. Continue it onto the rear card. Now I can remove the patterns from the boards. I don't need the boards anymore. Okay, so having a nice radius around here, around this handle that's even from here to here and here to here is pretty much essential. I'll measure those 2 points. So we have from centre, we're looking about 2.5 inches. So I'm just gonna draw a 12-inch flute in. You see how that looks. This is all done by eye now. You just want to see how things look. Alright, so there's a couple of ways I can do this. I can do this as one large piece of leather. Fold back the whole lot and just stitch in this design here. Or I can cut out this as a separate piece, flute it, sew it into this bit here, and then top stitch the seam. I know how it has been made, this one, but because it's one colour, if this was a separate colour, obviously I'd have to do it in 2 different pieces, but because this is just one colour, I can get away with doing this in one piece. So I am going to now put lots of holes in this pattern. Right, I've decided to do this slightly different than I said I was going to. I said I was going to do it in one big piece and just stitch in the design. I've decided to do it differently. I've decided to actually make this fluted part as a separate piece and then stitch it into the main body. And I'm also going to put a join here and here on this top bit. Then we're not wasting quite as much leather where the window is. I could have done it as one piece and then put this in the separate piece, but for the sake of you guys, I'm going to do it the way I'm going to do it now, just to show you how to deal with insert panels in a door card. So you'll have an insert panel on one, and the other one you just have straight panels, which are pretty straightforward. I've got the leather on the bench. I've given it a bit of a pre-stretch. That just means I've just tensioned it on the bench. I've stretched it a little bit, pinned it down so it lies flat on the bench. I'm going to tape the pattern down to the leather. Just a little bit of tape on the corners. Now the most important part of this is obviously where the seam is on the insert panel. The other bits are going to be slightly over length anyway, because they'll get wrapped around the board and then stapled to the back. I like to keep a set distance on all the parts that get wrapped around. I just use a ruler as my excess, so I just put the ruler up against the pattern, draw that line in, draw the edge of the pattern in as well, and then draw in where the insert panel is going to be, remove the pattern, put the seam allowance on that, because this line here has no seam allowance. It is just literally where the seam is. When I come to draw out the insert panel, I'll put a seam allowance on that, and then when I come to draw out the main body, I'll put a seam allowance on that as well. I'm just gonna draw this in. Now this doesn't have to be exactly the right or exactly this amount all the way along. It's just a rough idea. Now some people might say that I put too much on this. I could get away with putting less. I always like to have plenty to grab hold of. You can get away with putting a tiny amount on if you want to, but then it just becomes awkward to pull around. And having a set distance that I've added on, I can actually mark that on the reverse side of the board with the same implement with the ruler, and then I know where I'm stretching to. It'll be very evenly pulled all the way around when I come to staple it on. So that's why I do this. And also it's better to have a little bit more. At the end of the day, this bit here will go to waste, and this bit here will go to waste. No matter how much you add on, if you had a tiny bit on, I'll still be wasting loads. Mark on the actual edge of the pattern here, and the same here. So now I need to put a seam allowance on the inside of this line. There we go. That's that one drawn out. Now I don't know how much of this you can see on the leather. You probably can't see very much. So if this was a vinyl, chances are the back of the vinyl is not always black. If you're using black vinyl, it can be grey, white, lots of other colours, but not always black. So much easier to write on, much easier to see. That's waste. I'm going to cut the match marks in while it's here. This is an ear notcher. Used for notching ears. Used it on things like sheep, pigs, but great for leather. So that's my first piece. I need to do another one of these, but the other way around. But on the two rear cards, because we're not having this design here, it'll just be literally a rectangle, and a fluted rectangle, all sewn together, easy peasy. Right, it'll be fun. I waste quite a lot with these door cards, with having this bit at the top here. Could actually cheat and make it in a couple of pieces. We'll see, I might actually come across the corner. So having a seam, just so I don't waste loads and loads of leather, because it's quite expensive to waste lots of leather. Just have a seam diagonally here at the top corner, and that will mean that this is a small piece of leather and this is a little bigger piece of leather, but not a weird shape that I'm wasting all this part in the middle here. That's probably the way I'm going to do that. So all these things you got to think about, the best way to actually use the materials you've got without wasting too much. No one's going to really know, well, you lot will know, but it's not in a daft place, it's not in a stupid place. It just means I get more out of my leather, I don't waste quite a lot. I'm already wasting quite a lot with this design here, so saving where I can, I will. Right, so these are two fluted panels. Not fluted yet, obviously, but they will get fluted. And I've foam backed them in 6mm scrim foam, and I've cut away the foam where the leather's going to go around the board. I don't want foam on the back of the board because that's going to try and push the board off the door, and it just makes it a little bit easier when all you're dealing with is a bit of leather when you're stapling on the back of the board. So now that is done, I need to work out where the flutes are going to go. Now on this one, we're on 3-inch flutes, and we did say earlier that we are about 27 inches. Now we've got a seam allowance here, so we're a bit more, 28. So I'm going to deduct the seam allowance from the widest point, which is about there. So my seam allowances are 3/8 of an inch, and we should be about 27.5. We are exactly 27.5. I'm going to move it over 1/4 of an inch and find 27.5 of that is 13.5. That's my centre point. That is where the flute is going to start. I'm going to work 3 inches either side of that and do 3-inch flutes. On the rear card, I'm not going to find centre. I want to have my first flute 3 inches from the edge of the board. Always better when you've got an edge that's seen, which will be this edge. The rear edge, there's a back seat, backrest that goes here, so it doesn't matter where we finish on our final flute. And we've got a sloped end, so the final flute is not going to finish like level with here, because it'll be at an angle somewhere like this. So we might have a flute here and one up here somewhere, but it won't matter anyway. I'll start on the rear one, marking the flutes. Now I can do this 2 ways. I can either mark 3 inches along the top, 3 inches along the bottom, do a line, or I can just mark 3 inches along the top and put square along it and square down. Either way works, doesn't really matter, but I will mark 3 inches top and bottom and join the dots. 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, and that's 3. Now the wider the flute, the less accurate you've got to be. It's always nice to be accurate, but on a wide flute you can't really tell if your lines are absolutely spot on, but the closer the lines I get, the easier it is to notice any error. There we go, that's all those drawn on. I'm not going to film the sewing bit, it is literally just sewing straight lines, nothing complex. Right, I'll show you where I'm at, what I've done. So obviously the whole card is now cut out, including the window. Any holes that are supposed to be in the card are all in. I have foam backed, well, I put foam on the parts where there's no foam on the leather. I've done that because I don't want foam on the back of the cards. It's just much easier to put the foam onto the board than it is to put the foam onto the leather, then have to trim the foam off around the excess on the leather. So that's why I do it like this. Now, some people don't do this, they put foam on everything and then just put the whole thing around the back, staple it with the foam attached, and that makes the card a bit thicker and kind of pushes it away on the door. This way you get no more than the thickness of the leather on the back of the card. Makes fitting the card much easier. So what I need to do now is to glue down the fluted part. So this the section here where there's no foam on the card. I need to now glue the cover to this part. I'm not going to glue it to anything else. Not to this part, not to this part, just to the fluted part. Right, so I'm not going to glue this in one hit. I'm going to fold it in half. Glue this part and then fold the other part in half and glue the other part. So I'm just making sure now that the flutes, the stitch part of the flutes, is glued down. I'm more bothered about that part than any other part. So this edge and the flutes are the most important thing. Now the rest is just going to get stapled on. There's no reason to actually glue anything else on. Stapling it will be absolutely fine. It will pull the leather tight, allow me to get rid of any creases, wrinkles that are in the leather, and give a nice finish. Now something that I forgot to do. Where the seams are here, I need to put a little relief in the board on the edges here, obviously this end as well, and anywhere else there's going to be a seam. I need to make sure there's a relief for the seam. So I'm just going to do that now. I'm just going to use a chisel and just notch that out with the chisel on all the seams. And I'm not going to do this seam here that runs along here until I've got the leather stretched. So I will kind of stretch it to the top, stretch it up here, and then I know exactly where that seam's going to fall. So what I'm going to do first, I'm just going to put a few tack staples in just on on the corners, so bottom corner, this corner here, and then at the top. I need to be very gentle with the top because there isn't much board at the top here, so I need to be quite gentle with that. Need to make sure that we've got enough leather in places like this to get around, which we just about have. You can always manipulate it a little bit, and that's fine. And we're fine there. Now when I staple this on, I'm going to use 4mm staples. I've obviously got a 3.6mm board, a 3mm foam, and that comes to 7-ish mil in total. Call it 6. So 4mm staples will be absolutely fine. They won't come through to the other side. So these are also type 71s. So I'm going to pull the corner tight. Put one staple in. Pull the corner tight. Put one staple in. That'll be enough for now. We'll turn it over. This is going to get flipped over quite a lot. And just check it, just make sure everything looks alright. We're flat. We're fine. Got to do the same at the top. Notch out the little notches for the seams. And then staple the rest on. Put one staple just in there. Right, so that's it for now. That's just to make sure everything is lying correctly. It looks alright. I will steam this as well before it gets finished. I'm just going to stick a little bit of plywood behind that. I don't want to cut the leather. Absolutely spot on. Now I can just staple. There's nothing too tricky about this. This is just about keeping even tension, and that's it. You don't want to overstretch anything because we've got this middle section glued down where the flutes are. That's not going to move at all. That's the most important thing, not to have things that are stitched moving, because that has to be in the correct position and line up with the next card. So if that moved while I'm putting this on, then that would be an issue. But because it's glued down, not going to move, don't have an issue, but I still don't want to overstretch any particular part. So nice even tension all the way around, and just start stapling. Now when it comes to corners like this, 90-degree corners or even more acute corners, what I always do 90% of the time is put a staple in the corner, coming from the corner diagonally towards the centre. I'll put a cut out from the corner and have my two little ears there. I can get rid of that bit there. And then when I come to staple this, I'm just going to staple this as normal. We've got a little curve here. I need to deal with that curve, so I need to put a couple of relief cuts in that curve. Not many. When it comes to making relief cuts in things like this, you can always make them deeper. If you make them too deep, then you're pretty much stuffed. I'm just going to put one staple there, put another staple next to this staple that I already put in diagonally. One staple there, and now I can cut this excess off here. Same on this side. Staple in, diagonally. You can now cut off the excess. Doesn't matter what you use, whether you use scissors or a knife. And then I would always flatten that down a little bit and continue up the card. I'm going to trim off all the excess later. I'm not going to do it right away. Now if you notice, I'm not stapling straight down like that. I'm stapling it slightly at an angle. It's always better to fire them in at a slight angle. It will just pull the leather a little bit as it goes in and make it a little bit tighter. Now when it comes to these seams here, the seam is obviously thicker than this here. There's 3 lots of leather, so extra 3mm here, 3mm board and 3mm ply, 3mm scrim, that's 9mm. I'm going to put a 6mm staple in there. But I ran out of 6mm, so it's going to be an 8mm, but I'm going to fire the 8mm in at an angle. So an 8mm at an angle is not going to go through the board. If you fire an 8mm straight down, potentially it can go through the board, but if you fire it at an angle, then it makes the staple shorter effectively, not going that way, going that way. Hope you understand that. Always remember, change the staples back. Now I'm going to do all these seams at the end, not going to do them all now, because if I forget to actually change the staples over, I'm going to be in trouble, because I'm going to go through the board and out the other side and into the leather, which I don't want to do. Done that edge, so I'm going to check it. Always best to check things as you're going along rather than leave it till the end and realise that you might have left a wrinkle in somewhere. You make sure that everything is alright before you go any further. So when it comes to curves like this, I don't put relief cuts in here and then bring it over and staple it. What I'll do is pull, tension, staple, pull, tension, staple. We're now on the straight edge. Now when it comes to spacing of staples, I always leave a staple width, so staple, staple width, staple, staple width, same here. And you don't need to go any closer than that, but if you go further away sometimes you can end up with unevenness. Same here, I've got another wrinkly part here, so I'm going to put a staple in there, one in there, and then to deal with these I'm just going to put a staple right across the wrinkle. Same here, wrinkle, so staple right in the middle of the wrinkle, then there, middle of the wrinkle, then there, and same there. Now this wrinkle is quite big, I'm going to do the same thing, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to flatten it a little bit, and there we go, no wrinkles. This will all get trimmed off later. So we've got a little bit of a curve here, so again, internal curves. It's not a very big one, but it still needs a couple of relief cuts. And I'm going to put a little wrinkle there first. We've got a wrinkle here. Deal with the wrinkle in the same way, grab the middle of it and staple straight across it, gone. Wrinkle again, pull, staple across it, gone. I'll flip it over again just to make sure we're all looking good there. So you can see here we've probably got a little bit more leather than we need. It's probably just the fact that this was on the edge of the leather where it's probably more close to the belly, so we have a bit more. And I'm just going to pull it that way a little bit as I'm going along, and that'll get rid of that excess. I'm going to leave this bit to the last. Put one staple in there. Flip it over again. Check everything. We're happy enough. So again, we've got a corner here. Do it the same way I did the last one. Go diagonally. Just get rid of this for now. So this is a curve all the way around there, so I'm going to do the same as I did with the bottom bit. Just push the leather that way to get rid of any excess here, and this way as well, pull it inwards. I don't want to over tighten this because we've got a very weak spot of the board here, but over tighten it might distort that, so just careful about how much tension I put on. Now I'm putting these staples a little bit close together just because we're on a curve. I'm just going to trim these off for here. Now when I trim this, I'm using my finger here, this finger, blade in the hand, and that's my guide, my finger. So I get a nice even cut. I'm going to staple these now, the seams. So back to my 10s or 8s, yeah, and the first thing I do, put these back in. Alright, so this is just more or less all curves. We've got a little bit of a straight edge here, but the rest are just curves. So I'm going to start with the straight edge. I'm going to put a cut there, and probably to there, and then you start to cut into the curve. Don't want to go too far, like I said, can always cut more. Now these things need checking quite a lot when you've got internal curves. Now we have a window surround that goes around here. That will be absolutely fine. I'm just going to put a cut now along there, into the corner, into the corner. That is now done. I'm now going to do exactly the same with the front door card. So this is obviously the front door card. I've done the same. Put the foam on. I'm going to glue the fluted part down to here. Staple on exactly the same way as I did with the other card, no difference at all, exactly the same techniques. And then I need to make the door pocket and the handle, and that will be done. So I'll get on with this, don't need to film that, you've already seen me do one card. This is exactly the same. And then once I've got all 4 cards to this stage, I will make the handle and do the pocket. The pocket is only a elasticated pocket, so it's a 2-piece. It will have a hole in here, obviously, when the cover's sewn onto it. When the cover's stapled onto this, it has the pocket face, which is elasticated, and then it has a back to it, which is then stapled on the back of that, and a gap about here, just so you can actually get things in the pocket without catching. Oh, one thing I forgot to do was put the hole in for the seatbelt.